got a huge set of balance changes dropping today, and I'm going to completely break it down for you and how good these brawlers are going to be. We got 18 total changes. 5 brawlers getting nerfed and 10 brawlers getting buffs. Get ready for a completely new meta. Alright, let's start out with the 5 big nerfs to some of the best brawlers in the game. So we're gonna have a new top brawlers. Let's start out with one brawler who's been one of the best brawlers in the game for an incredibly long time. Darrell is getting a buff to his best star power, Steel Hoops. It's getting a huge nerf, and it's been nerfed already twice in a row. It used to last 2.5 seconds. Now, it's not even gonna last 1 second. It's gonna last 0.9 seconds, which is barely any time at all. So we'll see how good Darrell is with this new star power, but if I were you, I would start using rolling reload a lot more. Steel Hoops might still be usable, but it's not gonna be good. Now this next nerf is gonna completely change this brawler and how it's played, and that is BEA. Honeycoat is getting a huge nerf. Technically also buff, but only because the nerf is really big. Now, Honeycoat will only trigger once every match, just like Extra Life, but it's a worse sort of. Is it a worse version of Extra Life? Well, you'll have to see later on exactly why I question this. But also, there's been a buff to Honeycoat, and now the shield, instead of lasting 0.6 seconds, it now lasts 1 second. So you do have that invincibility for 1 second, and you avoid certain death, but only once per match. So now you're really only going to use this star power in solo showdown and probably duo showdown. And outside of that, I don't think you should use this star power. You're probably going to want to use the first one, which gives you extra chances if you miss that supercharged shot. Admittedly, not a great star power, but you get to use it for the whole match at least. Another new brawler is getting a nerf, and that's Mr. P, and he's actually getting a really big nerf. His main attack range is being reduced by 12.5%. That's a huge nerf in general, 12.5%, but nerfing range is really impactful. Now, admittedly, his range was one of his biggest strengths, so this is an appropriate nerf to nerf his range, I think, although this is a really big amount. So we will have to see how good Mr. P is going to be. I do think he's still going to be definitely an above average brawler, maybe still top 10, I wouldn't be surprised, just because of how good his turret is. His turret is just so good. Infinite respawning of the porters is still a really solid thing, and that's not getting nerfed at all. So he's still going to be a solid brawler, but nerfing that range will make him now have to engage in fights a lot more, and he's going to start taking more damage. So we'll see how much impact Mr. P is going to have. Another strong brawler getting a nerf is Carl, and what I had as the best star power in the game is getting nerfed, Protective Pirouette. I mean, understandably, it really deserved a nerf, and now the shield going from 40% is now going to go down 10% to 30%. So it's still going to be a good star power. It's still going to be a strong star power. I would still recommend it over Power Throw, although maybe Power Throw is going to start creeping up in use rate. But Carl will still be a good brawler. Not a huge nerf to him, but an appropriate. Before we get into the buffs, the last nerf goes to 8-Bit. I'm not quite sure why 8-Bit's getting a nerf, and I'm not sure why Extra Life is getting a nerf. But 8-Bit no longer has the invincibility shield when he respawns with Extra Life. And they're not bringing back his ammo, so he's gonna respawn after he dies, but he will have no invincibility and he'll have no shield. What? Why? It makes no sense. It's gonna be a horrible star power. I don't understand why they're doing this. I guess 8-Bit's win rate in solo showdown has just continued to be way too high at high trophies, but we'll see how usable the star power is. Now there's a bunch of buffs, and a lot of bad brawlers are getting buffs, and there's a couple, 1 or 2 good brawlers getting buffs as well that we'll have to talk about. But first up, there's a bunch of health buffs. You got Frank getting a health buff, about 5%. You got El Primo getting a health buff, about 3.4%. Poco is getting a health buff, about 5.3%, and Pam is also getting a health buff, about 6.7%. So 4 brawlers getting health buffs and just health buffs, I mean, look, you're probably noticing a pattern here. Primo got a buff, second highest health in the game. Frank got a health buff, highest health in the game. Poco got a health buff, who's pretty high health, but of course is great with tanks. So perhaps a tank meta will be incoming. Now, Darrell with Steel Hoops did just get a nerf. Of course, Darrell's still going to be fine, and he'll still have Rolling Reload. And honestly, maybe Rolling Reload will be even better now, so he can do more damage to the tanks that are going to be in the meta. And if he has a Poco on his team to heal him, he might not really even necessarily need Steel Hoops anyway. So to be honest, Darrell probably not going to drop much at all, maybe a little bit, but he's still going to be pretty solid. And of course, one brawler getting a big indirect buff is Shelly because of all these tanks coming in the meta. Now, Shelly's not getting any actual buffs, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see more Shelly. Some throwers got buffs as well. One of them the most annoying in the game, so I'm not very happy to see it. Yes, that's right. Tick is getting a buff. Why? I'm not sure. He really, in competitive play, he definitely did not need a buff. Let's put it that way. Maybe for normal randoms, casual players, he probably needed a buff. Admittedly, I think Tick is really weak with random players just because he doesn't work well if your team doesn't hold lanes or go after objectives in any smart way. But he's getting a damage buff, 6.3%. It's a solid buff. He's definitely gonna appreciate it. He's probably a top 10 brawler now. Although with all these incredibly high health brawlers, we'll have to see. He's definitely not gonna be great on tanky maps because it's gonna take him so long to get a kill on someone like Frank or El Primo. It's just gonna take so many hits, especially if Poco's in the meta. Maybe Tick won't be everywhere, but on any map that's good for him, oh man, it's not gonna be fun. Dynamite also got a damage buff. Dynamite definitely needed a buff. He got a 5% damage buff. I probably wouldn't have buffed his damage, to be honest. I think I would have buffed his attack speed, his reload speed, one of those things. You know what, at least he got a buff, so that's good. I think people will appreciate that. He deserves something. He's gonna do a lot of damage now if he hits his shots, and that's the big if. Another sort of thrower, but not exactly, got a buff, and that's Spike. Spike, one of the best brawlers in the game for a long time. He admittedly dropped down to my last tier list, but still a top 10 brawler. And actually, he's getting an indirect buff through the meta, which is going to be tank meta, and Spike is amazing versus tanks. So he's also getting a damage buff, and actually a big damage buff, 8.3%. So I don't know why Spike is getting a buff. He's going to be happy. He's easily a top 5 brawler in the coming meta. And he might even be top 3. Another bad brawler getting a buff is Colt. Colt definitely needed a buff, especially with Takedown gone, so he's glad to see it. He gets about a 6.7% damage buff to both his main attack and his super. So definitely a solid buff for Colt. We'll have to see how good this makes him. I don't really think it's going to be a good brawler until the maps change to really suit Colt better. A lot of these have a ton of walls that just make Colt hard to reliably and consistently hit shots in a row unless he can really open up the map. So maybe he'll be better though. I mean, tank meta, he should have easier shots with a lot of tanks, and they should be helping feed his super, but we'll see. Another bad brawler getting a buff is Leon. Leon is getting an interesting buff only to the damage he does at his maximum range. He's getting a 75% buff about technically, but it's not a lot of extra damage. Going from 103 to 178 damage at max range. What this is gonna do for Leon, help him out in 1v1 situations a lot more, and he'll actually charge his super quicker at max range. So, you know, when he's supering and chasing enemies while invisible, it's not actually gonna help him out at all. It's only gonna help him charge that super and help him, you know, in situations where he's just doing chip damage. So not actually a big buff to Leon. I don't expect him to be that much better, but it's the right direction to go with buffing Leon, and we'll see how much it impacts him. The other good brawler getting buffed is Ems. That's right, Ems is getting a buff. She's not an amazing brawler, but she was really solid. She happens to be really good versus tanks, so this will be an interesting meta for her. Of course, once those tanks have super, they can definitely counter her, but in every other situation, she's really good versus tanks. She's getting a health buff as well, 5.6%. Also, one of the worst star powers in the game, Hype, is getting a buff as well, very well deserved. 33% increase in the amount of healing that's going to provide. I don't think Hype is at all going to be better than Bad Karma, but it might be usable on specific maps where you think you're going to have really value supers versus a lot of enemies, probably 2 at least, to get good value healing out of it. But really, you don't want to be you know, taking damage a lot while you're supering enemies. So I don't know. I don't think it's a good star power regardless, but Ems does get a buff. Let me know your thoughts on the balance changes down below. I'd love to hear your opinion, but I do hope you enjoyed this video. Check out some more great Brawl Stars videos right off to the side. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you later. Have a good one.